of Detonation. I'm your host, Steel Archer, and we are busy putting death out of business. All right, everyone remembers it's Jason Mallory, Mallory 2020. Lovely to have you back here, sir. Loved your interview last time. We're talking about the robot tax. Very innovative idea. Very, very good, cool stuff. But before we jump over to you, I do need to mention I thank you to our sponsor, Thrivous. Linky Cannon there, Geoprotectors, Nootropics, fantastic stuff. So the more people share the episode, follow the link descriptions, the more money you're going to make. Jason, you can also enter that competition if you want some free Thrivous. It goes from $5 all the way up to $160. That's huge. And that's massive. And, it promotes the ideas that we promote on this channel. It promotes, intuitive conversation. It promotes, idea generation. So you might as well do it. Get some free Thrivers or go to the website, check it out. Thank you to David Kelly as well, I Am Transhuman, for sponsoring this episode. Fantastic. Check out I Am Transhuman campaign. Now let's talk about Hyperloops. I'm so excited. I love the Hyperloop. Elon Musk, sort of made us interested in Hyperloops. But Jason, you're taking it to another level. But before we just rock into Hyperloops, tell us how your campaign is going. How are you? And what else is going on, sir? Good to see you. I'm just going to adjust this light, but you talk to the audience.
All right. Well, it's nice to see everybody here, and big supporter of Detonation. As far as how my campaign is going, it is moving forward. I'll say that. It's still basically a campaign producing solutions to existing issues, some of which being in the adoption and adaptation to automation, being what you already mentioned, and which we have a pretty comprehensive video on. Another one of those solutions is for transportation, which is a climate solution. It's a national security solution. It's a very interesting design to do a Hyperloop coast to coast and be able to send a shipping container from Pacific to Atlantic Ocean or vice versa in much less time than taking a boat and with zero emissions.
Wow.
So attempting that, as well as one other thing, which is a health fax app, which is essentially making a nonprofit where citizens would be able to have a comprehensive medical record. So if you go into a different doctor, you could still bring all of your medical record and be able to have curative results. So I'm suggesting that. Those are the three things I'm putting on the Silicon Valley platform for CD19 in California, the 19th Congressional District. And we'll see how it goes. There are 5 people in the primary, so we'll find out how it all boils down. But yeah, the Hyperloop coast to coast, I think, would be a much better thing to have than a wall that's dividing us. I think if we can bond rather than divide over something that's benefiting both countries by giving the United States and Mexico same-day coast-to-coast delivery with zero emission, and in the process of having that, what costs a lot of money to throw on a jet plane currently, it's possible to have same-day delivery, but it's not good for the environment. It's not cost-effective. And if something is a replacement where, 5 or 6 hours later you can go from San Diego to the Gulf of Mexico with a shipping container, that I think is something that's a real value addition for our country and our neighbor, as opposed to having something like the border wall, which is something that's giving us a bad relation. But what it is doing is providing the opportunity to make something better, and I think that both sides of a Hyperloop would want to protect its usage rather than having one side trying to kick out another side. It doesn't seem like as good of a relation for me, nor would it be able to return the ROI, the return on investment for the U.S. tax dollar, when we can have something that can actually generate money through a shipping toll instead of something that's costing us relations and maintenance and all of those types of things.
Yeah, so let's break it down. So the history of hyperloops is kind of interesting. They aren't really they didn't really take off yet, but they're kind of a new idea on the on the table.
They've been around since like 1700 was a lot of some of the initial. These are not
Well, I
such as
mean, they're an extension from the aqueduct. You know, like this movement of, you know, if you, or a barge. You know, if you want to look at it like that, moving goods more efficiently at less cost. But in terms of the modern era, the steam train, because of the steam train, the adoption of trucks and trains has been much more prolific, right? This has been where society has seemed to go. Um, why would a hyperloop? Firstly, let's start very simply. Where would you like to see a hyperloop go in the United States? From where to where, and why?
I would like to see the budget being spent on the border wall be spent on the production of a barrier that is actually going to produce good for both countries, and to be able to kind of heal some of the damage that's going on there. With Trump's border wall, it's part of national security, even though it's not a popular thing, and no one wants to, have to be a gatekeeper for something that they don't want to have to tell people no about, or acknowledge that things like coronavirus and other forms of bioweaponry could be implemented through hordes of refugees, thousands of refugees looking to walk across the border that are maybe carrying something that would be detrimental to the country. So having a very real national security threat and a solution that's basically Donald Trump's wall, I don't see the implementation of that solution being a wall that, quite honestly, you could defeat with a stick tied to a rope or a grappling hook. Instead, I don't see that technology, which does nothing but sit there as a fence-style wall, be able to produce the same ROI numbers for the U.S. tax dollar that something like a Hyperloop in-placeable wall would be able to generate, where we're able to have same-day coast-to-coast delivery. We're able to have a shipping toll that can pay for its construction. We're able to reduce a massive carbon footprint from having to take international shipping boats and things down through Panama Canal or around South America. So it's really good for the environment. It's really good for business. It gives the consumer same-day coast-to-coast shipping, as in, you can get Texas barbecue in Los Angeles, 6 hours away or something on the Hyperloop, whereas to drive that would be 2-3 days. So I think it would be a massive upgrade for our country, and something that would help both the U.S. and Mexico thrive.
Yeah, so your suggestion is coast to coast, so from the East Coast to the West Coast, but also are you talking about from Mexico to the United States?
I'm talking about having it in place of a border wall, something that we can share instead of divide from.
Okay, all right.
Also, rather than spending money on just a wall, we could use those funds to make something that's actually going to produce benefit for us in the future.
If you're going to build one big one, let's say from the East Coast to the West Coast, I mean, why not have intercity transport? Why not take this idea out and have a network of hyperloops all over the United States? I mean, is this an idea? I mean, why not have one from San Francisco to Los Angeles to Toronto? I mean, to to New York. Why not make an interconnected network just run underneath the existing highway infrastructure?
There is one that the state of California spent a whole lot of money producing a Hyperloop between Bakersfield and Stockton, which I believe the plan is then to have San Francisco pay to connect to it, to Stockton, and LA pay to connect to Bakersfield. It's kind of a failing. project at this point. It's going between two farm towns instead of two metropolitan cities. So, and say what you will about the state of California and being able to build anything in the state in an effective way, it is what it is. What I would think would be the second, in my mind, the second highest priority for a Hyperloop would be first establishing that form of transportation nationally by going coast to coast, using the existing energy and funding and such toward a border barrier. So if we're able to capitalize on that, if we're able to realize the opportunity that we have here, regardless of the divisions of party and all of these things, if we're going to do something there and we do it as a Hyperloop, we just made national infrastructure. The next one that I would choose to make would be from the tar sands of Canada in place of the Keystone Pipeline down to the Gulf of Mexico. So that Texas is still running the oil game, no problem. And as the world transitions from oil, Texas is still positioned to have a tangible subsidy, essentially, of a very large port, being able to run mercantile industry, not just oil, but still have oil and access to the tar sands with at least as fast as the pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline can pump it. But you're not running a pipeline through the largest aquifer down the middle of the country, and potentially polluting what our most defensible space would need to use for farming. So the ability to have an above ground Hyperloop that can move just as much oil at least as fast, and if something breaks, it's not bubbling into an underground lake that people need to water their farms and drink from. Instead, it's something that we'd be able to see with our own eyes rather than something under the ground and be able to prevent real catastrophic environmental outcome.
I love this idea of using it on the border wall. I like this idea of looking after the aquifers while you're doing it, and running it between metropolitan regions. But something that a lot of people are asking is eminent domain. Does this come up? What are the eminent domain laws? In Old English law, the United States is different. I do not know the answer on this in the United States. In Old English law, it's above and below to the stars you own, and then they changed it to about 10 feet up, like a power pole high. That's how high up you own. Airports are a little bit different and stuff like that, so you can't charge airspace. But how do you get around this idea of eminent domain? Is it as simple as just running it under the current federal highway system, or are you going to be running it in a straight line where you're going to run into issues, or are you going to have it down so deep that you're not going to run it through private property? Because building the Keystone Pipeline, for example, and all these different pipelines, you run into eminent domain issues all the time. What are you going to do about eminent domain when that comes up? The border wall, of course, a completely different story. The federal government is just bulldozing through there. They don't really care so much. They just want to build that wall. But what do you say on eminent domain?
Well, with eminent domain and I have a few things I can say that I probably shouldn't. If we're doing it on the border, we don't have to build a giant pipeline, a giant vacuum tube through somebody's house or across somebody's farm where they want to put their tractor. The design that I've come up with, and there are a number of different ways of implementing the design, is to put one tube under the ground and connect it to another tube above the ground. That way they're not blowing over. And you essentially, it would hold itself up that way, and could be a very easy way to do it, where you're really just towing a trailer that's like a 3D printer on a pole spinning in a circle and printing a pipe that, so if you're going 1 mile an hour or whatever, you can do that, and you're just pooping this big pipe for however fast you can do it. Same with like a boring machine under the ground, and then enabling that, plastic or epoxy or whatever other kind of material you want to build it out of. So the construction of it with eminent domain, you don't have to go through somebody's house, right? Say, hey, we're gonna build this bypass through your yard now. It's not happening. It's the border where you're not supposed to have a house there anyway. So what our real estate agent president Donald Trump has done is figured out where is the border line, where's the property line, and where is the setback for building for the fence. And he's doing a 30-foot tall fence, so it's got to be able to fall over 30 feet without crushing a house. Those types of things. And so some of that paperwork hassle has been essentially sorted through the building of the wall. But before we spend all the money and do most of the project, I'm suggesting design that would have much greater results for us and our neighbor and our international shipping partners and the climate and all of those things. So yeah, I'm basically submitting what I believe to be a better solution.
Yeah.
I think that you're onto something quite interesting, though, as far as just if we were to bore under, for example, Interstate 80, which goes from San Francisco to New York City. That's another great way of doing something like that. Although it's more than 1,000 miles longer,
cost
to get coast to coast. Yeah.
But you've said if you can eliminate some of that cost by 3D printing, you're talking about a more roboticized construction idea than traditionally is thought. I mean, when you're building a highway or something in the 20th century, it's a huge investment. It's a lot of people. It's machines. It's diggers. But with what you're saying you need a boring machine. You need a 3D printer. You need a couple of thousand people, and you're done, right? The construction costs are coming down across the board. So even if it's longer and it's just under a highway and it's longer, I mean, maybe it'll come out in an equivalent cost. Is that what I'm hearing?
I doubt it. I think it's about, well, I mean, our southern border is like 2,200, 2,500 miles, something like that, kind of depending on if you straight line a few things or not. To go from SF to New York is over 3,000 miles. Plus, that's going in a straight line. So if it would increase the time and expense to do it in places that are not as easy to do that. When they built the Panama Canal, they ended up redoing this. 40,000 people died in the building of that from mosquitoes, by the way.
The Panama Canal is one of the great wonders of the industrial age, and the French started. They failed because they were high off the Suez Canal. Success. Kudos to them, but they failed. They almost sent the country bankrupt, and then America came in, and they tried the same. They tried the same level crossing. They tried to dig a hole, and it didn't work. They had to invent a series of locks and water tables to lift those boats up and over the hardest, devil's cut or something they call it, right? That was the big problem.
Yeah, and then they connected to that big lagoon or bay or whatever you want to call it, instead of going across to the open ocean. We could save 1,000 miles of Hyperloop by going to the Gulf of Mexico in the same kind of way, rather than going from open Pacific to open Atlantic. If you go from San Diego Pacific to Brownsville or Corpus Christi area, Gulf of Mexico, it puts the mercantile industry right there to subsidize Texas oil, as well as making a much larger and interactive port in a very defensible space in the United States, and kind of centralizes some things for for a mercantile industry, for more efficient shipping. I do see that this could be a form of transportation that can make a lot of things move a lot easier, faster, with zero emission and all of that. The ability to implement that is very difficult, and especially the very binary, bipartisan system that we have currently. Part of what I'm doing as a no preference party candidate is showing some solutions that, if the two parties were functioning together, they could come up with.
And I appreciate you coming on the show to tell us about that, and I hope all the best in all your endeavors. Thank you so much. So let's the two-party system is a mess, by the way. We totally agree here on this show. And are you going to the March 4th debate? I would love to see you up there in Chicago. I don't know if you are.
I'm not likely to make it to Chicago, although I'll help out Ben Zion, and I hope to put him on what I'm calling the Sacramento Soapbox. It's an idea stage so far, but I built the stage, the soapbox. It's a trailer that has a sound system and a projector and things in it. It's pretty cool. And what I'm attempting to do is to strengthen the democracy of the United States by standardizing a 5 to 15 minute, like a TED Talk, but a candidate profile video. So voters are able to, line up everybody in the election, see the who, what, why, where, and how of each of these candidates and why they're running, and then make their selection, instead of who is able to purchase so many ads or what have you, and having that be what's actually decided.
I love that. I love it a lot. And it'd be fun. I don't know. Like, this is a great idea, by the way. But it could be fun to, like, I don't know, have on a projector behind them, who sponsors them, and you can see where the money comes from, so everything's transparent. And if people don't want to play with that, maybe not. But regardless, the whole candidate profile idea, this is a great idea. It's about ideas and seeing and transparency, and seeing who else is out there apart from just Republicans and Democrats. It gets a bit boring. Thank you for supporting Ben Zion in that as well. Gennady was just on the show, and he said this might be the largest third-party debate in the history of the United States, up to 20 different candidates and political parties. Huge.
Yeah, I think that there are definite changes that are occurring in the political landscape, and I've been nominated for Congress twice. Once in California's 4th congressional district, where there was a long-standing incumbent Republican congressperson, and there were more no-party preference voters than Democrats. And this year I'm nominated in Silicon Valley in CD 19, where there's a long-standing Democratic incumbent, and there are more no-party preference voters than Republican voters. The people are not being defined as Democrat or Republican, and that's starting to define the political landscape as duopoly or not. And that leads to, is it fascism? Is it, if you don't really have a voice, because you can't get on the ballot without being part of one of these two systems of control and on their agendas, then is it we the people? Are we holding true to the Constitution? Becomes a real question. And as we navigate that reality, whether people in the parties want to face that fact or not, it's occurring. So I'm interested to see what comes out of the March 4th debate.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it. We're going to have a big special show here. You are invited to the pre-show, post-show. You're invited to be a commentator, whatever you want. So we always appreciate your voice. Now, let's talk about the benefits of a Hyperloop. Let me just think of some randomly. So safety improved, because there'd be less trucks, less congestion, less carbon footprint. What about hygiene as well? Hygiene would go up, and your ability to monitor the goods and services, right? Because if there's illegal weapons or something on these shipping containers, I mean, they're going to get scanned before they head in the machine. So better monitoring of illegal weapons and stuff, chemical weapons. So safety is improved, yeah?
I believe so, yeah. I mean, rather than trying to put a Geiger counter for who's carrying something nuclear on every truck. You could have it at the input of the Hyperloop, and then get every single shipping container. So yeah, as far as some health and safety issues, I think could be improved by it. While with basically trucking going the way of automation in the next decade or so, I think that there would be a loss of jobs that are going to be lost anyway. So why not make a technology that's going to be the best for all existing after that? So there will be some truck driving jobs that would be lost, regardless of this technology or not. But that reduction in carbon footprint from, be it a self-driving electric vehicle that could be powered from a coal-burning plant, and that's not a zero emission really, or a zero carbon footprint, in comparison to being able to blow air essentially through a tube. Using electricity that we could do in a sustainable fashion. I see it removes some congestion. It would remove some domestic carbon footprint. It would also remove an international carbon footprint from so many boats not having to go so much further, and just makes everything faster and better.
The Cold War produced the Federal Highway System. There was markings of it before, but they really got moving with the Federal Highway System in the 60s and in the Cold War, as a way to knit America together and a way to move goods and services across America faster. You can move troops around faster. You can move people and population groups around faster. It just makes America more efficient and better. Could this be a new federal highway initiative? Like if you get a candidate such as a Bernie Sanders who wants a federal jobs program, for example, and you're saying that there would be a lot of jobs. It's not just as easy as getting a 3D printing machine and a boring machine and clicking the green button. If this is
involved, but yeah, it's not like you'd have to use people to do these things, but it's not like you would shovel dirt with your hands.
No one's saying that. But if this would be a federal jobs program, there'd be a lot of. Well, you said there would be a lot of jobs, right? It's not just as easy as clicking a button and saying go. Would this be like a new interstate highway project?
Yeah, it would be an infrastructure project that would enable better use of our country, better use of our own roads, the existing roads. It'd be something that would speed up transportation coast to coast, same day deliveries. What I've designed is not for people; it's just for shipping containers. So it's not like moving a bunch of Californians and Tijuanans from San Diego to Texas. It's not that. It's just shipping containers. That's how I'm trying to get Hyperloop's foot in the door.
Do you see existing industries such as the trucking or the railway system, the railway companies, etc., as fighting this or as embracing it and as being investors? Or do you think they'll sit around in federal court trying to get it blocked? What do you see? And also states, do you think states would embrace it or try and get it blocked, or it's different problem with different constituencies? What do you see in terms of investments and the states and corporations fighting or embracing?
I think if we utilize it as a somewhat military objective through the border wall, we can get around a lot of that stuff and not have the problems that California has had in its trying to implement a Hyperloop, which you can research on your own if you like.
Yeah, no problem. It's cool. So yeah, it's a really interesting system. And how outside of the United States, a country like my country, Australia, is a very large country, equivalent to the size of your country. We could use a Hyperloop system as well. We're not, by per capita, we're as rich as, or if not richer than the United States. There's only 25 million of us, and we have a multi-trillion-dollar economy. But we don't really have the sort of the big budget talking points that you guys have. We can't do a Green New Deal for $1 trillion or something like that. We talk in tens of billions of dollars. You guys talk in hundreds of billions of dollars. Is there a way of bringing those costs down so countries like Canada, countries like Australia, arguably China or Japan could afford it, for example, but some of Europe, especially Eastern Europe, who are poorer countries, is there a way to sort of eliminate some of the costs or help or assist or make it so that these could become talking points in other countries? Because I can see a huge need for it here in this country between, say, Brisbane and Sydney. That's a short trip in its own, but a very necessary trip. Melbourne and Sydney also a very short trip, a necessary trip. Canberra and Sydney, for example. What do you say?
Yeah, I think that how you're building the Hyperloop and what its usages are for is going to matter a whole lot. I mean, you can do these things that are based on, like a rail gun essentially, or magnetic levitation, where you can get 6,000 miles per hour. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is one that's using air pressure and using air to push essentially a shipping container that has a parachute on it, if you could imagine that. And it would go around 500 or 600 miles an hour, but it doesn't have to push through the air. The air is moving it. So the trains and planes that all push through the air are fighting air as opposed to using air. So getting that kind of basic flip around is something that I think is going to be able to change the way we transport things. I think I've heard of about a dozen or so different Hyperloop projects that are happening around the planet. How those are happening, I don't really know. As far as what if you're going between two cities, does it make sense to just do a dip where you could pretty much drop something off, almost like a perpetual motion, right, or pretty close, and just roll it down a thing and have it make it to the top of the other way? That might be one way to go in between two cities really easily. Although, what does it take to build it? The boring machine and all of those things. Really, where we're at is in the R&D phase, or the early adopter phase of these technologies. While they've been well thought out for hundreds of years, they haven't been implemented. With the exception of like some banks that you can, before the ATM, you can pull up to the bank and put your check and whatever else in the little flunk tube. And that's essentially a Hyperloop, but a really small one.
Yeah, I remember the old cash machines when I was working cash registers at a big company here, equivalent to your Walmart or Whole Foods or something, a big retail outlet. Yeah, we had the same thing. You would gather up the cash, you'd stack the cash in the tube, and then you'd put the tube, whoop, and off it'd go, and straight up the tube. And it was a great idea. Is there? I was actually going to. That was my next question. Are you you're moving towards it? But we're talking about a giant system here, intercontinental or continental system, a Hyperloop, or the size of a border wall. But is there a way to make this idea or a smaller Hyperloop for cities, intercity transport, for example, moving goods and services around a city, or is there just not the demand for that sort of movement?
Elon Musk is doing something similar. It's not quite a Hyperloop, but it's skirts for cars to like parallel park on the side parking spot, and that parking spot would drop below the road into a series of tubes, which would then be able to pull the car while sitting atop that parking spot, a skirt, at 100 or 200 miles an hour or something, and be able to literally go underneath the horribly bad LA traffic. I see that as stuff that can occur, although we're still in the early adopter phase, which means the very first mile of Hyperloop built is going to be your most expensive mile. Yeah. The last mile is going to be the cheapest mile, most likely. Yeah. It might have extra parts and everything. So yeah, as far as how to do this, what I've designed as far as a build, and I'm going to say there are a lot of different ways to do it, would be basically a trailer that prints a tube that a truck can pull at the speed that it can print at. So we could produce 100 of these and put them all equally spaced on the border and fill in the gaps. Then move them to other places in the country and build more. It's something that we'd be able to implement this technology faster and better with that, I believe. So it's something I'm suggesting. And I'm gonna turn a light on in this room. It's
Okay.
getting kind of dark.
Yeah, it's getting a little dark in there. It's super interesting. Well, miniaturization is interesting in this form of this car park idea, moving cars around. You could foresee it actually having its own carriage system where you sort of jump in a box and everybody sort of goes off. It's kind of like a mini subway system. It's interesting. Food and fruit. Do you reckon? Do you envisage spoilage happening? Because you said it's happening with a parachute, right? So if there's fine china or fragile objects or something in there, are they going to get rattled around and broken? And what about transporting things like medicines? I mean, if they're or essential goods and items. Is it less risky than a truck, or more risky, or what about fragile items and stuff? Are you going to save those items from being destroyed and damaged?
Well, with the design that I've envisioned, essentially we're printing this tube, and if you look at a shipping container, every corner of the shipping container, and mind you, this tube is only to move those shipping containers, not for people or other stuff, not trains or what. Just for shipping containers off of boats. So each corner of the shipping container, it has like 3 holes in it that you could grab and put a spring going to a railing, and there's 4 railings on the inside of that tube, right? So that tube has 1, 2, 3, 4 railings in a square, and each corner of the shipping container has a spring going to that railing, and in between the springs is parachute material. So you've got a system that's going to have it like shock absorption, right? You're actually suspending the shipping container in the middle of the tube. It's not sitting on the ground of it or something. It's sitting in the middle of the tube, and you're able to have shock absorption. So if you're going at 500 miles an hour, and the tube, curves up to go uphill and then down to go down, you don't want it to just fly out of the, break a hole through the tube or something. There are springs that are catching it, right? That are keeping it from swaying any direction too far too fast. So even though the tube might have a change in trajectory, the inertia from the shipping container is going to be smoothed out in that trajectory change from the springs. So kind of like driving a truck on a bumpy road. I'm not saying it's going to be a smooth ride, but it's not like there's no shocks. So we'll find out
what about, so there will have to be a planned route that isn't just a straight line, right? You can't do it, you're under the ground, you can't do it as the bird flies, because in some places, I mean, you're talking about the whole of the continent of the United States in one respect, and there's some places that are earthquake prone. There's earthquakes that happen there. Yeah. So you wouldn't want it in an earthquake-prone zone, so it's going to have to curve around. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, the entire west coast of the United States is an earthquake-prone zone.
So how do you deal with that?
If there's an earthquake and it breaks, you got to go fix it. That's pretty much how it is. But if we're doing it in a way where it's essentially something that you can melt, like take a caulking gun. Do you know what a caulking gun is? Right? So a caulking gun, you with like whatever, kind of adhesive in it, and tie it to a string and spin it in a circle and just keep piling itself up, being able to create the Hyperloop tube like that, or to be able to remelt that plastic if it breaks or something like that. The ability to make repairs quickly and easily, I think it is something that's a lot easier to do if it's made of plastic and epoxy rather than concrete. there's more flex to it. It's less brittle, so it's less likely to break. But if something did shift dramatically and break it, then yeah, I mean, either rebore if it's underground or just repair from
I
the
mean,
outside.
if you hollowed out a cavern for it to exist in, almost in suspension, where where the loop was not really defined by the earthquake zone. I mean, by the structures of the soil and the rock around it. Maybe that would be a good idea. So suspend it. I mean, you would have to worry about falling rocks and bits breaking off and damaging the loop. But for the most part, the actual tunnel would be suspended inside a cavern-like scenario. And if there was an earthquake, it would just gently rock a little bit, you know, as the supports held it there. Is that an idea? I mean, it's a little more work than just, you know, drilling out a boring machine, but again, it's now protected from the contact with the external subterranean surface.
Yeah, I think so. Some areas it would need to be lifted up, and some areas you might need to shave the surface of the ground, and then going from the one that's above ground connecting to the one that's below the ground. Those connections could be, you know, varied in height essentially, so that we're keeping a smooth ride through both directions, so that we're not, you know, taking a sharp turn and a shipping container flies out the side of the tube. You know, not a good idea.
There's some areas of America that are easier to do this than others. The Midwest, for example, big straight prairies, you know, or you know, very straight roads and stuff, quite easy to handle. What do you think there are other areas where there are mountains? You know, over toward, you know, it's just going to be impossible, and you're just going to have to kind of stop
Yeah,
the
you're not going
machine.
to bore under Lake Tahoe. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen. As far as like going over the Rockies and that sort of stuff, it's pretty difficult. But it's not impossible. And it's something that I think we would have a good chance at doing along our southern border. So yeah, as far as what the easiest, I mean, if everything's flat and there's never any wind or any issues, you know, that's of course the easiest place to do something. But you know, the salt flats are not the entire country. So as far as what I see being the most progressive movement forward for implementing climate-friendly transportation technology, I say using the energy and budget and military involvement of the border wall to foothold national Hyperloop as an infrastructure project. All politics aside, I think that would be good for the planet, good for both countries involved and our international shipping partners.
Well, you know, I have a lot of faith in Americans. They said Hoover Dam would be impossible. It happened. They said the Transcontinental Railway would be impossible. It happened. They said Panama Canal was impossible. It happened. They said a lot of things that Americans have done. They've built so many amazing things, and they've happened. Americans are ingenious. They're ingenuitive. They're hardworking. They are a proud people that are capable of a lot of things, and I don't see why a simple pipe from the east to the west would stop America from would grind America to a halt. I think it's something that's possible. I think it's a nation building project. It's something that would knit the country together. It would knit international relations together. Comprised of Mexico and Mexican and American relations. I think this is something that's sorely needed. I think the trauma that's ensued between Mexico and America is bad, and an infrastructure project that benefits both countries is something that should be embraced. No, Americans are sorry.
Yeah, that's what I hope exactly.
Yeah. Americans are an ingenuitive people. They're brilliant people, and I could see them achieving this in the long run. I don't know why they couldn't do it. But I also see it as an idea that uh, can be taken a lot further within metropolitan areas, within municipalities, between states, between corporate liaison, and in a world that's changing rapidly. These sorts of, I mean, drones are okay. They're going to change. There's going to be drone superhighways in the air. But why not? Why not a more efficient transportation method under the ground as well? I don't see why, if we're going up, we can't go down as well. It's just a good idea all around, and it's a good idea to play with. It's just a good idea. I like it a lot, and it enhances your national security. It enhances your viability in the green space. It's more environmentally friendly. And you can, do you know James Jones, by the way?
James Jones.
James Jones? Yeah, he runs CubeSpawn. I must put you onto him.
Okay.
CubeSpawn we've had him on the show a few times. CubeSpawn is a fantastic project, 3D printing project. I'll put you onto him. He's an engineer. He could assist you with a lot of the engineering specifics. He's a genius when it comes to this sort of stuff. I'll put you onto him.
Cool.
And, James
Awesome.
Jones.
Great.
Yeah, he's a genius. He'd be able to tell you a lot about the engineering specifics of a project like this. But the actual idea, the notionality of it, fantastic.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, I think it's something that neither party is going to really bring about. Trump's not he's not refacing the border wall as an environmental thing, and the Democrats are not seeing the opportunity environmentally in a way that they're in any form of communication with the people building the wall. So as far as breaking down those partisan barriers and being able to do what's best for the country, as a no-party preference candidate, I feel that's the best position to be able to voice an idea like that.
Let's quickly rock into your healthcare app idea. Let's go from the very start. What is the healthcare app? What's the demand? What issues is it solving?
There are a number of organizations that are startups or been around for 2 years or less that are doing similar things. The medical industry refers to it as EMRs, or electronic medical records, and in the United States, they're in many different hands and broken up into a lot of different ways. So like if you go to a Kaiser hospital, you have your medical record there, but you go to an area where there's no Kaiser, so you have to go to a different clinic. So now you have more medical record, but it's there. So you go back to the Kaiser doctor and you're no longer able to have comprehensive medical record. So as far as going one step beyond that and asking for data-driven search results for not just what word you type into a search bar, but using your entire medical record as the search bar, right? So looking at all of the syntax of all of your, all the text and all of the typed out diagnoses, as well as all the imagery from your x-rays and MRIs and things like that, and having that give a search result for what likely conditions and possible treatments that are curative, not just here's how we farm the sick in America. Instead, here's how we cure our people and have a functional populace. That's something I see as something the National Guard should be involved in if we can't get our socialized healthcare to get figured out here real easy. So what I'm suggesting is essentially for people to be able to have a place for their own medical record, and to be able to bring that into the doctor so that all of that homework is already done for the doctor. They have access to the patient's medical record, and can also see if there are updated treatments, such as microbiological treatments instead of surgeries, for example. Those types of things. could be listed before the doctor goes and gets another CME credit after 20 years of being a doctor. Well, I'm not looking for doctors that have 30, 40 years of experience. I'm looking for doctors who have modern understanding and application. And that there's a big disconnect in the industry of healthcare between what's actually curatively effective, between what is experienced and what is up to date. And being able to bring in, well, here the app says, yes, these are the 3 different cures for this condition. There's surgery, there's oncology, and there's whatever else. Then it could potentially even give a percentage likelihood of your curative outcome, as well as cross-referencing all of that to the patient's individual healthcare plan, and being able to say, here's the dollar figure out of pocket for what this is going to cost. Here are the different treatments and different likelihoods. So all of that difficult conversation is had before going to the hospital in the first place. And it can keep the doctors up on what the more curative treatments are for what patients and why, and make our doctors better doctors.
Yeah, synchronicity across the different institutions is really important. Also, protection of the private citizen, their medical records, is important. We had this debate in a big way in Australia because the government tried to sort of uniformly put everyone's medical records into a government database and said that this was going to be mandatory unless you opted out. And then the security breaches started to happen. There was a lot of issues that popped up here in Australia with this consolidation of patient records, and they scrapped the whole plan because they didn't think about things like blockchain. They didn't think they didn't think very intuitively. They just thought, we'll throw it into an Excel spreadsheet and just consolidate, and that was their big idea. Didn't really work very well. But
how it's implemented and the routes used over the internet are some of the bigger issues in regards to being able to actually secure that kind of data. So what I'm suggesting is similar to like the Pirate Bay. I don't know if you're familiar with that, or like torrent sites, those types of things. Similar to that, as far as a sharded, encrypted, decentralized, and potentially constantly changing form of databasing in order to protect that as well as possible. So while anything you put into a digital realm is potentially hackable, for lack of a better word, the ability to make that as difficult as possible, or even to give off disinformation to anyone who's not truly identified as the individual, is what some of the offenses that we might take to the people committing an offense of trying to hack others' medical records.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's hard because we do have quantum computing coming around the corner, and I think you have to start thinking of ways now to sort of disengage from the quantum problem, to secure yourself against the quantum problem. And I think this is probably what was in the back of the minds of the Australian government when they started to do all this, because they realized the security mechanism was not going to be strong enough when quantum hits, and that's a whole national comprehensive database that would be exposed. But decentralization is very powerful, and there's a lot of secure networks in decentralization. So yeah, it's very interesting stuff there, Jason, Mallory. Is there anything else you want to tell us about this healthcare idea?
Just that I think it would help citizens be healthy and be able to live longer, healthier lives. I think it's the same as your data can be your right potentially. I think your health data is something that you have access to. The ability to have a digital folder that we can keep secure as best as our country can is something that I'm proposing to do in a non-profit format, as opposed to a for-profit health service. I'd like it to be accessible to everyone. That truly is healthcare for all, and it could come at the cost of electricity.
Absolutely, yeah. The cost, that's the great thing about the digital age, is a lot of the costs have dropped to almost zero. You know, apps are the same thing, and there's a lot of innovation that can come out of there. Well, you know, what's the name of it? What's the website where people can read more about the Hyperloop and the healthcare idea, and your website in general? Plug.
Mallory2020.com. 3 really good solutions on there, and just trying to put some actual progress forward as a no party preference candidate in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, you're doing a really good job there, Jason Mallory, and thanks for coming on again to talk about all the different issues and your robot tax. People, if you haven't seen that, you can watch another episode where amazing idea about this automation tax. And using that to promote different companies and build up American economic infrastructure. Very clever idea.
How to make a middle class post automation through the sharing of the tools and funding a UBI with similar effect as being able to control interest rates for the supply side, but being able to adjust an hourly rate on the demand side for automated labor. I think it's a superior economy to the forms of capitalism we've been able to have prior to these levels of automation.
Yeah, super good stuff. It's excellent stuff. That's Jason Mallory. That's Mallory 2020. The link will be in the description. Make sure you check that out. This guy's great, and thank you very much. And always welcome back to Detonation. Bring your friends. And we'll hopefully see you around the March 4th debate. Thanks for supporting Benzion 2020 for the US Transhumanist-Party, as always. Thanks to Thrivous, thanks to the I Am Transhuman campaign, and thanks for your participation in making the world a more democratic place, enhancing the plurality of voices outside of the two-party system that exists within all of our countries, my country, your country, Canada, UK, everywhere. There's this two-party tyranny going on, and it's locking out voices that should be heard, that are promoting innovative ideas. And I thank you, Jason, for being on the front line in that as well.
You're welcome. We the people, we will be heard.
Absolutely, we will be heard. But they'll make sure of that. All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you. And thanks to my Patreon sponsors. That's Chairman Gennady Stolarov of the US Transhumanist Party, David Shoemaker, and Mike DeVerde, the super fan. Thank you all. And if you want to donate and help us get towards a 24/7 news network, that would be great, wouldn't it? All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Jason.
Cool.